Welcome to Bitcoin Fixes This, where we explore the impact that Bitcoin will have in all aspects of society. Today's guest is Fode Diop, Bitcoin coder from Senegal. We talk about the CFA Franc, their colonial history, and the injustice of the monetary policy. Fode also tells us what it's like on the ground in Senegal versus France and the US. Fode Diop, how's everything going, man?
Oh man, everything is beautiful, man. I think there's doom and gloom in the world right now, but I always try to remind people that life is beautiful, man. We are alive, we're kicking, we're just working hard, trying to take care of our families and stuff. So life is beautiful, man.
Man, I love this optimistic energy
yes,
you got here.
Yes,
Where are you at right now?
I'm actually in Miami right now, getting ready to head to West Africa right now.
Okay. So, this is one of the reasons I brought you on the show, because you definitely come from a different perspective. Tell us about your background, where you grew up, and what it was like, and so on.
Yeah, sure. So, yes, I was born in Dakar, in a small city called Dakar in West Africa. Actually, Dakar is the capital of Senegal, and it's the northmost western point in Africa, as a matter of fact. So, flying from Dakar to New York is pretty much only a seven and a half actually hour flight. And it's a very diverse, was a French colony back in the days. We received our independence in April 4th of 1960, so not even that long ago. And we've had about 3 presidents, and it's one of the few countries in West Africa that has never been taken over by the military. So we've actually always had a democratic elected president. I grew up in middle class, I would say, family. My dad was a math teacher in my high school, and my mom was a homemaker, and she raised us, me and my brother, basically 2 of us. And I had a chance to go and study in Europe, initially, actually, in France, in a city called Metz, the German border, because I actually spoke German when I was in high school. But I ended up just luckily going to the US in 94 to study computer science and to play basketball.
Okay, well, so a lot there, but
Yes,
but you grew up in Senegal, which is a fairly young country, as you mentioned. It's maybe 62 years old. What's the history before 1960? Like, what's the colonial history and so on?
Sure. So, well, as you probably already know, Africa was pretty much divided and shared by the European conquerors, I would say, or colonial powers. So a lot of it actually happened after slavery, I guess, was abolished, and they were still trying to figure out a way to get resources and take advantage of the continent, pretty much. So they split it between themselves and just took a pencil and drew up the map and say, okay, well, this part is for Portugal, this part is for France, this part is for Spain, and whatnot. And Senegal basically was one of those French colonies in West Africa, which is one of 15, I believe, actually, or one of 14, because there's another one on the other side. And so we were just under French ruling for a long time. We were not really truly, again, independent. So the French came and tried to have this thing called the Politics of Assimilation, which means that they tried to basically make the colony as an extension of France, per se. So we adopted French as local official language, even though we have our own native languages. Like for instance, myself, I speak Wolof, which is my native language. But, in order to be actually able to go to school and to study and all those things, then I have to basically learn French. Which is actually quite of a hurdle, I would say, if for getting educated. So because you are pretty much getting educated in a language you don't master, and it's very, very difficult, for the majority of the population to finish school, unfortunately, in West Africa, right? So the French language is very difficult, and trying to actually study complex topics like mathematics or physics or chemistry, like I did in high school, could be actually also quite complex in another language. So yes, then there were wars and all these things. And at some point, I believe in the end of 1945, in the Second World War, France realized that they couldn't really hold these small African countries as a colonies. So what they did was they pretty much pulled out. But before they pulled out, they made sure that they pretty much left 2 things behind, which is basically the French language and the French currency, or African currency controlled by the French, called the Franc CFA. And I know I went a little bit over actually what happened during that period, but that's kind of how it was. So we were basically under under this French occupation for a very long time, under Charles de Gaulle. And then, so we actually even some of our military went to help France fight during the Second World War against the Germans and all that stuff. And then, it was just a pretty much, how do you say, a exploitative kind of a relationship, unfortunately.
Yeah. So Senegal has, as with many African countries, this history of colonialism, which was, very I don't know how brutal it was or whatever, but you had a military occupation for a long time. How many years was that? Just to get a feel.
That is actually a good question. Unfortunately, I don't have it exactly in my head right now. But it ended in 1960, and then I would say, that was a long time, man. Actually, that's a good question. I have to look it up. But quite a while.
Okay, but you had basically physical imperialism for a long time, and then this thing called CFA currency comes along. Can you describe that a little bit? Because I don't think most people know about the CFA, and that's very interesting.
Yes, so the CFA is the currency we actually currently have in West Africa. Actually, there's two variations of it with two central banks. But let's actually, for the sake of simplicity, let's just say that actually these 14, 15 countries share the same currency. So this money is printed by France, is made by France, and is part of the colonial pact, actually, when France left in the 60s. So what they did was they said, okay, well, for us to kind of help you run your countries better and make sure you control corruption and everything else. So they offered basically this colonial pact where they will provide the money for these countries. So to this day, in 2022, this money actually that's used in West Africa is made and printed in the south of France. Then it's actually distributed in these African countries. So what it is that actually when these countries basically individually sell goods, let's say in a global market, let's say they say oil or they say minerals or some coltan or stuff that's used within your mobile devices, then they get paid in the national currency, most likely actually US dollar. So because they cannot pay their own people with their US dollar or pay their salaries of their constituents and citizens, so this money basically is sent to France, and France basically holds the majority of this money as a deposit almost or as a guarantee. And then in return, it prints this money and gives it to these African countries. And that's really how it works right now. And then to make even actually matters worse, so we have two central banks, one I believe in Cameroon and one in Senegal, actually, my capital itself. And then in the central banks, for the longest time, there was a person sitting on a board from France who was supposedly oversee issuance and the management of this particular money in these countries. And for the longest time, actually, this is actually, it's been a problem, actually. I was at the longest time. It's been a problem from day one because a lot of people recognize that this is the money, basically, this is monetary imperialism, and it's a way for France to still control the ex-colonies, unfortunately. And we can talk more about it if you would like.
Definitely more. But all right, so let's get this straight. You have 14 countries in Africa.
I would say 15, yes, 15 actually. Yes.
Oh, 15.
Yes.
Who use the same currency, which can be useful, but it's essentially controlled by France.
Yes, exactly.
And it's called the CFA, the Central Franc Africa or something like that. Or
yes, actually, it used to even have a worse name in French, actually, back in the days. But because of uproar, they basically changed the name to CFA. But it used to be called something way more actually derogatory, basically the colonies of France, the money for the colonies of France in Africa. Actually, literally that's what they translated to in French back in the days. Then they changed it to the CFA to make it a little bit more diplomatic or a little bit more PC, politically correct, basically.
Well, it probably had such a bad reputation they had to change the name or something.
Exactly. Yes. So the money, yes.
Yeah, we know this from altcoin land, where coins will change their names
for whatever reason, right? Yeah. Yep. So that's what they have. So this money is made again, yes. So it's actually used by these 15 countries, yes.
Okay, so they use it for commerce, but to go over exactly what happened, 1960, you get your independence, but as part of that independence, they said, we'll even give you some money, but you have to use the money that we give you and not any other money.
Exactly. And actually, this they learned because this was pretty much created in December of 1955 by General Charles de Gaulle. And if you think about it, actually, through history, you realize that actually that the French learned this via the Germans, during the fascist days. Because when France was under occupation by the Germans back during the Second World War, when Germany came, they pretty much took away their money and gave them a specially denominated Deutschmark. The German currency itself, right? So France had to basically use this money. They had to pay the taxes to the Germans with this money and so forth. So I believe actually the French learned actually through this process, how they can pretty much do the same thing to these African countries to basically keep them in servitude. Because if you control someone's money, you pretty much control that person's livelihood and you pretty much control this country's economy. Because at the end of the day, again, money is just pretty much technology. And what it is once you have data on this technology, you have actually way much more control over these a particular group of people or nations, basically. So that's how they created it.
Well, it's not just France that learned it. I think the U.S. learned it
Yes.
too with Bretton Woods and so on. It's a common pattern, and it's interesting that you characterize this as sort of like monetary imperialism, because you did have physical imperialism. We all know that how expensive that can be. You have to have like a whole infrastructure of administrators and so on, and a military occupation.
Exactly.
I assume there were a lot of soldiers and people from France and stuff in Senegal before 1960. Right?
Exactly. So actually, before 1960, they usually have like a huge base actually there in Senegal, and actually also like the base there. Actually, the original base has like a really dark story, as a matter of fact. And I can like touch on it really quick. So what happened was a bunch of Senegalese soldiers who went to war during the World War to help the French like fight the Germans. In the end, they did not get paid, or actually did not get properly remunerated. And when they asked for it, they got gunned down in the fort like that was in Senegal itself. They really literally killed these veterans on Senegalese soil because they asked for a better pay or like the money that they were supposed to be owed during the Second World War. And something that's put under the rugs, but it's really one of the darker stories actually of Senegal, like within the corporation of like French armies and whatnot, right? But to go back to answer your question, so yes, they used to have like a huge presence, but they also like they had this presence like throughout all the colonies in the world, actually, most of them in Africa, obviously, right? But they realized that would be like a really expensive endeavor to maintain for the long term. It's almost like the U.S. having all these basically military bases all over the world itself, right? It's a huge like financial demand to maintain and upkeep and like really, like deliver stuff to these places. So ultimately, they decided to actually like really pull themselves back. But what they did actually, I feel like that was very detrimental to these African countries is that I feel like our education system is one of the worst in the world, I think, as a matter of fact, right? Because I believe that the French left it there behind like that, exactly, because they wanted to train the folks they can control and folks actually that would pretty much like help and maintain the elite status of this French thing. Actually, right? Or this French, like, how do you say, ideal per se, right? Because then what happens is you have like, again, to make it simplified, you have in the nation, you have a group of people that speak French, and then that basically group of people actually become the elite of the particular society, right? Because then when you don't basically speak French, you are considered like illiterate, or you are considered not part of the elite who can like really express and write and speak in this particular foreign language itself, right? Which is like really horrible itself. So I feel like our basically schools there, they don't train engineers, they basically train subservient folks, actually, unfortunately.
Well, that seems to be sort of like a hidden cost of monetary imperialism is sort of like this, like lack of using the human capital that's there. It definitely seems that way. But I want to focus on something that you just said, which is very interesting to me. There is this sort of like social stratification where you're like, you have the French people in France who are, at the top. And then you have the Senegalese people that speak French, which are in the middle. And then you have the Senegalese people that don't speak French, who are sort of like at the bottom.
Exactly.
And like, your story even about like, them gunning down, soldiers that fought for France during World War II. I mean, it reflects this sort of like very stratified social ladder that kind of gets imposed on. And, obviously it's kind of a holdover for colonials, from the physical colonial era, but it seems to have continued through the monetary imperialist era. And I think what you're arguing is that the monetary imperialism is just as effective in keeping sort of that, the stratification of, social, class or whatever in the country, continuing to keep that.
Yes. It makes me like really sad, man, because when I go home, sometimes I see kids, like I'm talking about like Black African kids, Senegalese kids, right? That speak French like they were like in the middle of Paris or something like that. So, and you can tell actually their families raise them like that. They don't even want them to speak the local language, which is really sad, right? Because then you have like these people who like basically like pursue, again, this European ideal, and they live in the middle of Africa. Like, which is like to me like this like really delusion, this delusional thing that's happening, and again it's like really the vestige of like colonialism and all this stuff that basically this luggage we're carrying from the French folks again, like unfortunately. right? But it's there. Like I'm like, yeah, I see like, little tiny kids running around, but they speak in the French of like people who grew up in Paris. You know what I'm saying? Which means that their parents basically, maybe they actually get educated in Europe or in France, but they basically like really raise the kids to be like that, to even have this diction, to have this accent, this French accent, like in the middle of Africa. And actually, in the end, so I don't know. So I hope that they want to do it because they want maybe the kids to speak like another language better to help them like financially or whatnot, or like maybe to benefit them in the long term. But if it's just like to like really bring these French ideals on the African continent, I think it's a huge mistake and doing the disservice to their communities.
Well, it's all sort of like the cultural thing, right?
Yes, yeah.
The monetary imperialism necessarily kind of adds like a cultural imperialism of like language and things like that, because the people at the top speak a certain way, look a certain way. So you want to imitate them as much as possible in order to get those same positions.
Exactly.
Because there's this money flowing from them to you.
Exactly. It actually kind of ties in a little bit again to the Cantillon effect, because what it is like then the people who are the closest to the money, and who is the closest to the money? Well, it's the people who speak this particular language, and it's,
So they're really seeking, they're going for rent seeking positions.
Like, exactly.
You're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah. Nobody ever wants to work. Rent seeking is so popular. Yeah.
That's right.
Wow. So describe to me sort of like the dynamics of the culture there then, as a result of this monetary imperialism, this sort of like social stratification. And, obviously a lot of people sort of like almost conforming to the French ideal, not necessarily because they agree with it, but because it benefits them economically. So they end up doing things that maybe they wouldn't otherwise do. It's just sort of like they're bribed into becoming more French or something like that.
Exactly. Exactly. They're kind of bribed into this particular, I would say, not only way of life, but in this particular, like part of a group per se, right? Because the group that benefits again, like the most are like out of this economy because they speak this particular language. The laws are pretty much mimic actually the legal system in France itself. So we don't even have our actual kind of our own legal system. And when you get in trouble or when you actually do like business dealings and all these things, and you don't particularly speak this language, actually the business is made in, then it's actually, conducted in, then it's actually really complicated itself, right? It makes it like really, really super complicated. So for me, again, like the money is complicated again too, like, and it's also like tied like to the vestige of like this ex-colonial power or whatnot, right? But the idea to me overall is that we need to figure out a way to give, even to like, not even, how can I say this? We need to like bring the continent again to the source, which is kind of complicated because we don't really know how these two things that are kind of like, it's almost like when you use a hash function or you make a smoothie, there's no way for you to go back to the you know what I'm saying? Like,
one-way function, yeah.
It's a one-way function, right? So now we have even our own language is like fully like integrated with French words. So it's more like Creole now, It's like Wolof, but with like a lot of French and a lot of these things. But how do we go back to actually initial values? Like, how do we go back? Not to say like, how do we go back to like before the French got there? But how do we basically reclaim our identity by reclaiming our money to be able to like reclaim our sovereignty? Because without actually us reclaiming our money, there is no way for us to basically reclaim our sovereignty. And as long as we basically depend on these particular folks or this money that's made by someone else again, right? We could never somehow, I think, like really gain full sovereignty. So how do we basically get back to the state without necessarily like having to unravel a lot of that happened, a lot of the things that have happened in the last, let's say, century or so, right? Because of course, like between slavery and the colonialism and all these things, right? It's almost like all these setbacks. But even besides that, how do we still just go back to the source or go back like to even a plain level field where we can basically build like from that particular level? That's really what I'm trying to figure out actually, how we can do that.
It sounds like it's even difficult to unravel what the Senegalese identity is because of, all the, and you would think that it would be more free after, say, like 1960 when you get your independence. But the monetary imperialism still sort of has this like cultural effect where, it sort of penetrates and you can't unravel this. As you said, it's a one-way function. It's now something completely different.
Exactly.
And like, what do you even do with it? Because you had this sort of like weird love-hate relationship with your own culture because so much of it is, imperialistic.
Yes.
But, there are parts of it, like, it seems like a very sort of like complicated mixed feeling kind of thing with your own culture, which is not something that I think Americans necessarily would understand.
Understand exactly, because it's a really complicated situation again, right? Because we understand that we need to develop ourselves. We understand that Africa is maybe at least 50 years behind compared to the US or Europe. But actually, what it means also is that there's tremendous opportunities for people to build things and solve particular problems, even actually enrich themselves while basically solving these big problems, right? And so the money again, because we got to figure out a way to, like I said again, how do we tackle this? Because the money has really intrinsic problems actually with it itself, right? If you look at again, I said earlier that actually money is pretty much technology, right? And whoever controls the technology has a better insight as to really what's happening, right? And I'll give you a simple example. If you look at basically Africa, we understand that there's huge corruption there that exists. We kind of lie to ourselves or whatnot, right? Coming from the politicians, coming from the people in power or whatnot, right? They take a lot of the money that's not theirs. They take a lot of money in the country. They're buying stuff in foreign countries, in Switzerland, in Europe, castles or houses or real estate or whatever else, boats, yachts, and whatever, right? And we can always find these things through the Panama Papers or this kind of leaks, whatever. But actually, besides that, we don't really know. But who has actually knowledge of this information? That's France. Because actually France prints this particular money, right? So France basically pretty much knows exactly who's stealing what and how much and where are they hiding it, how many members of the families basically are part of this whole deal, and who's pretty much the kleptocrat part of the society in the French-speaking part of the world, because they control the money itself, right? So, which means that actually our constituents will never go and try to fight this particular power because they know that they have information on them. Right? So you are not basically going to try to fight someone where we know that actually they can pretty much put you in jail or get you overthrown or whatever else it is, right? Because they know exactly how much money you stole and where you're hiding it, because they know exactly where the money is at. You know what I'm saying? So actually, so knowing that, we know that actually at the core, this particular money is even corrupt from the people who made it or the people on top who basically use it, right? So, and I don't want to I know we know all of us really work in Bitcoin and we're trying to find use cases and all these things, whatever, right? And I don't think actually who said it actually. Maybe actually it was what is his name again? Berkshire Fuller, the creator. Berkminster Fuller, actually. I gotta check out his name, right? But what he said, I think it was that actually when you have existing system that's pretty much corrupt, but that's actually such a also ginormous 900-pound gorilla in the room, right? What we do is pretty much maybe create a parallel system doesn't have anything to do actually with the thing that's already there, maybe correct, but maybe actually this parallel system can maybe benefit from the older system that's already there. But the idea is create something maybe that's new, that's more exciting, something that's more, how do you say, more you can maybe transform and mold into something that you want to see for the future and leave the older system behind, because the system, again, like I said, is just corrupt at the core. And I hope it makes sense.
So a full version upgrade instead of a point upgrade or something like
exactly.
that. Yeah. Well, it's interesting what you're saying, because it sounds like, a lot of people there are already sort of invested in the CFA system. So there's no real motivation to change the system, even though it would be much better for the people.
Yep.
So let's go back a little bit and tell us about some of the ways in which, these 15 African countries get screwed over by the CFA. What are some things that happen to you, that you can talk about that you've experienced?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, one of them pretty much is really something that I lived myself actually, personally, right? So in '94, when I finished high school and I was about to go to college, actually I had two options. I already had a pretty much set university deal package to play basketball and to study actually mathematics and telecommunications at the University of Metz in Eastern France, right? Right at the German border itself. But me growing up in Senegal, I knew about the histories of racism in Europe itself, right? Because actually a lot of my uncles, a lot of my people that I know, their brothers or their older brothers, whatever, a lot of them actually ended up going to Europe to go to for higher education, for university degrees and whatnot, right? But I've also known growing up, listening to those horror racism stories with Europe and everything else, right? So I never wanted to go to Europe. And also growing up in the 90s also, I was a big actually fan of Michael Jordan. That's really my idol and my hero. And I wanted to be like this person. I literally wanted to be like Mike, because again, it's a guy that looks like me kind of, I'm tall, I'm dark skin, kind of same complexion a little bit. And I played basketball all the way throughout high school itself, right? And I really modeled myself as this guy that I saw just kicking ass on the court itself, right? And actually, that attitude I still carry to this day, like for myself, like just, just to actually through life itself, right? Being able to just like conquer things or whatnot, right? So growing up there, like I just wanted to like really come to the United States. So knowing that I had a backup plan, I just asked my dad to basically help me go to the United States, right? Because to me, like, looking at Michael Jordan, I just felt like I can succeed in America somehow. I don't even know actually how to explain it, but that's really how I really felt like seeing this guy, right? And I was always like a big like a fan of computers and stuff because I actually didn't know what they were. It's just that when I was in high school, like when I was in primary school, I went to like a field trip to one of the teachers school teachers thing, and I saw a computer for the first time in my life, and I just like was fascinated and like enamored with this thing, and I didn't know what it was. I used to literally buy magazines that had computer photos on the covers just to kind of see what it was. Magazines in Italian, in foreign languages, in English. I didn't even actually understand English, but I just was like fascinated with these things actually, right? And it's crazy, man. To this day, actually, that's like I have the same fascination. So I ultimately like my uncle was doing his master, the last semester of his MBA in Kansas. And so my dad reached out to him and say, actually, he was my uncle, but he was the husband of my mom's sister. And then he reached out and asked him if he could help me, maybe like find an inscription, like 500, a thing to the university for me to
a scholarship or something.
Yes, actually, even the admission, actually, just to be admitted in the university itself. Right? Then I go from there, then go to the embassy to ask for a visa. Right. So my uncle was able to help me get an actually admission letter, and then I went to the actually embassy to be able to like go to the United States. So I went to the embassy. And put all my paperwork together, everything that I had, by myself. I was like really young. I think I was 18, and I give them my paperwork, and they say, "Yeah, but sure." Like, they asked me what I wanted to do. I said, "Yes, I want to go to the United States. I want to study computer science. I want to play basketball. All these things, blah blah blah." The guy was like, "Yeah, that's nice, that's fine and dandy, but you don't have enough money." I said, "Yeah, what?" It's like, "Yeah, because American universities are very expensive. They ask for this much, you only have this much, blah blah blah." And let me tell you how I got there. It's because actually, like, out of like all the luck in my the luck in the world, right? So in '94, our money, the franc CFA, got devaluated by 50%.
Oh, wow.
As a matter of fact, right? So overnight, literally, the money that my dad saved for me to be able to go to college, right? Even doesn't matter if it was in Europe or to the US, that money got cut by half because France decided that it was time to devalue the franc CFA because it would be better for these countries because their exports will be cheaper and blah 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 and whatever reason, right? And that's really actually one of like the first, like really my first like real life experience as actually like understanding the power of basically the franc CFA and actually how it basically affects the lives of the people who don't even control it themselves, and me being the prime example.
Wow. So how did you and what happened then?
Yeah. So it was like really complicated. So yes, I mean, like, but I'm talking about this actually in retrospect, actually trying to understand what happened, actually, like why I didn't have enough money to go to college and stuff like that, right? And I want to like actually frame it in that particular context. So what happened was like, so it was, I think I was there on or either on a Monday or something like that. So the guy was like, "Well, you don't have enough money. You don't have anything else. Your parents don't have any more assets you can show and blah blah blah." I said, "Yes, well, my dad actually had book rights in a math book that he wrote, like with a bunch of people a couple of years prior." And I said, actually, he gets paid like royalties every year. And I think like that would help me support me to go to college because my dad actually was like, he will basically help me with that money, like support me in college. So I went back home. He asked me to come back. So I went back home and got all this paperwork for my dad's book rights. I got somebody to help me translate it in English, like really fast, actually. Certified actually translation, like I think in 24 hours. And I took it, went back to the embassy, and the guy looked at it. And I guess he wasn't convinced. And I just like, I don't know. I actually, imagine at this time, I don't even actually speak English, right? But I like tried to like really convey to him the idea that I need to go like in America. And the only option for him right now is to say yes. And the guy looked at me. He said, "Come back on Thursday and get your visa." I swear to God.
Oh,
That is exactly what happened, actually, to this point. And I'm telling you, I don't even speak English. And I don't even know how I was able to utter these words because the interview is a little bit in French, but mostly in English because they want to know that actually you are competent to be able to go to this particular country. Right?
I see.
So I was able to like really like just like put some words together and explain actually why I needed to go to the United States. And I think I said something about Michael Jordan or computer science and blah blah blah. Right? And maybe the guy was just like fascinated. He just gave me the visa. And then sure enough, the following maybe like 10 days, I was on my way to first to New York and then to Kansas to start my university degree.
Wow. So obviously you had this giant devaluation. How does something like that happen? Like, what happens? Like, do they just say it's worth this many francs or dollars or something like that, but
Yes,
now
yes.
it's half that?
Yep,
What
yep,
happens?
yep, exactly. So basically, so now France today actually is under the eurozone, right? So they use
Uh-huh.
the euro as money, as money. But prior to the France joining the eurozone, they used to have their own money called the French franc itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Franc CFA was pegged against the French franc for a particular. So how many French franc was actually you can basically redeem it for this many Franc CFA itself, right? Which actually we're going to talk about actually later also, like something really funny, that money is pretty much useless outside of these countries. If you go to France at the airport and try to like change this money, they won't even give you nothing. It's like really terrible,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, so it was like pegged to like the French franc for a while for a particular percent. I mean, basically like redeemable for a fixed amount. But then what happened was like, so French at some point decided that maybe our currency was too strong, that actually it will help again these countries because the currency was weaker, like help them like export better or whatnot, right? But
Mm-hmm.
really, who does that really benefit? It really mostly benefits France. Because then what happens is, like France can now buy. Not only actually do they have the first bid option to buy these raw materials from these particular countries, right? So let's say if these countries like find some uranium, uranium that actually enriches like atomic bombs or whatnot, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
France basically gets the first dib to buy this particular raw resource or raw material at the best possible price in the international market first,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then
Mm-hmm.
maybe only after they don't want it, then maybe that country can take it and basically sell it in the international market for whatever price itself, right? But France always has first option to basically buy these particular goods. Now, also like devaluating this money by half makes the goods even cheaper from these particular countries.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so now France. Now you imagine, right? Like France doesn't produce none of these particular goods, right? France has never produced gold in their life. They don't have gold in their resources, whatever, right? But yet the
Mm-hmm.
French coffers have the one of the biggest, basically, storage of gold in the world, and most of it comes from these particular countries.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and then how do they get, like I said again, get all this stuff, right? Because that was part of their policy. I mean, their basically goal, I believe, in devaluating the Franc CFA, because then, I mean, I would say not only basically France, but also the EU, as a matter of fact, also, right? The European Union actually, right, can basically buy the raw goods and raw materials from these countries for really cheap.
Mm. So, I mean, tell me about what Senegal looks like. Are there just lots of mining and farming and
No,
things like
no.
that? Or like, what are the raw materials just sort of like being harvested and going out to France and the EU?
Yes.
Or, I mean, is that the main industry there?
Yes, well, actually, okay. Well, Senegal is actually put it in perspective. Senegal is a small
Mm-hmm.
country, about like 17
Mm-hmm.
million people, and I
Mm-hmm.
believe the size of the country is fairly close to the size of Arkansas, the state in the United States, right? And like most of the African countries, it's mostly a agrarian society, which means that most of the people actually live from the land itself, and usually, and I believe the percentage is same in Senegal, the rest of Africa, which means that actually more than 60% of the people who live in the country itself live off the land, right? So through agriculture, through and actually other other activities related to agriculture, right? Then of course you have like now resources as well, like raw resources, which means that we have one massive gold mine which is on the east of the country, which is pretty much like exploited, or like not exploited, but it's actually like ran by a Canadian company actually called the Teranga
Mm-hmm.
Gold Company itself. But you also have other like smaller mines that have other like resources like zircon or phosphate, or like other like
Mm-hmm.
resources actually that are there, but less than other countries, let's say like the Congo in Africa, or like the CAR, right? But we still
Mm-hmm.
do have resources. We also have like a huge, one of the world's leading producers of actually also peanut, like a peanut,
Mm-hmm.
the shell. Peanut shell, that we have also peanut butter and all these things. So actually, all these things that come from peanut itself. We also have a huge fishing industry, because Senegal is like right on the coast itself, and our actually
Mm-hmm.
Atlantic Ocean is very fertile for fish or whatnot, right? So we actually have a huge fishing industry. And as of late, we also found huge, basically deposits of not deposits, but like reserves of natural gas and oil, which will start, I believe, producing as of like 2023. But huge reserves basically off the coast of Senegal, and it's becoming like a huge deal because, of course, Europe, with the war happening there, are coming to Africa now to find other source of distributors of
Oil and gas,
oil and
yeah.
gas. Exactly. So it's happening. Actually, it's
Yeah.
real right now.
Wow. Well, so is your main trading partner then France mostly? Is that the biggest trading
Yes,
partner? Or, okay.
yes,
All right. That makes sense because they control your currency.
yes.
They can do that.
And
But by devaluing, they're devaluing the labor costs of all of these inputs.
yes.
Is that what's happening?
Exactly, exactly. And also, like, not even actually do they devalue it, but they also have like kind of like direct access to these ports and all the services that are in the country itself. Because there's one company called Bolloré. I don't know if you can check it out later, but it's Bolore. Bolloré,
Mm-hmm.
like X with the accent on the E. Bolloré basically, they built a lot of like logistics and infrastructure companies in West Africa, like for these countries, and especially the countries that have like huge access to ports, right? So with these ports, they're able to like really tag into like these countries because they control exactly access in and out of these countries of these particular goods, and they know exactly what's being sold and what's basically being moved around. And also, not only that as well, they are also like really involved in like huge corruption cases, right? And Bolloré recently, for the first time ever, actually in the history, was finally actually convicted by international court of actually corruption, of paying basically
Mm-hmm.
people in these particular countries to be able to like move goods and get like preferable deals or whatnot, right? So again, like it's all like it's almost like a mafia kind of system, right? So again, they devalue this particular currency, they devalue the price of goods, they devalue the price of services, and they also like control access to the services, and they are able to basically get these services out in a simple like and controlled manner and get it back to their own countries and to benefit their own economies. And I hope to answer your question.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it really is kind of monetary imperialism in the very strict sense, in
To the
that
fullest.
they are using the money to get cheaper goods than they otherwise
Yes.
would, and they're able to extract the resources of Senegal for the benefit of France
Yes.
while hurting the actual people in Senegal.
Yes.
I mean, that's what it
Exactly.
sounds like.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. But now there's actually so things are like there's of course uproar everywhere. And like you
Mm,
said, like who's the main trade partners? Now, okay, so France was there, but obviously now China is coming strong,
mhm,
right? Like actually in
mhm,
Senegal itself, now there's a huge Chinatown, which is amazing. I went there last time. I was
mhm.
like, what? This is crazy actually. We have like a huge Chinatown. And we also have, of course, like America also like is a huge trade partner,
Mhm,
obviously, because America also like needs resources and everybody needs like, and of course, like Africa is one of the biggest like bread baskets of the world because
mm,
most of the arable land actually in the world for agriculture is in Africa itself, right? So it's very, very
mm,
important. So we have France, we have China, we have the US, obviously, but of course now we have a big player called Russia, and that's like really the
mm.
800-pound gorilla in the room itself because Russia is making a lot of moves on the military side of things, on like really other like basically like trying to figure out how to fit in the whole African narrative. So they are becoming a trade partner as well.
Interesting.
Yes.
Well, it is, we've sort of like moved, if we sort of look at it, everything from like a historical perspective,
Hmm.
we move from sort of like physical to monetary imperialism
Hmm.
as and you, for the, a country that essentially is doing the imperializing, they get a lot of the same benefits is what it seems like.
Yep.
And they essentially get cheaper goods.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit more about sort of like the movement of labor,
Hmm.
because I know there's like a significant number of people that immigrate from
Oh,
these
yes.
CFA countries over to France.
Yes.
And we know that France, at least the native population, is not reproducing anywhere near fast enough.
Oh,
So they
man.
need this infusion of extra people in order to even like keep up their society. How does that work, and what does that look like on the ground
Sure. So
in
this is a
Senegal?
really complex and sad story at the same time,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
Because again, like Africa is not really poor or because people are lazy or this and that. Like
mhm,
really, this actually
mhm,
stereotypes about Africans, right? Africa is poor because it's overexploited, right?
mm,
So then what happens also it becomes like the situation becomes very dire because the youngsters or the young population does not see opportunities locally itself, right?
mm,
And of course, because of media, because television, because of movies, because also like unfortunately how also people who go to these particular places and come back home and try to flaunt and like really money or wealth or whatnot, right? People have like really a wrong idea of like basically Europe, right? And
mm,
a lot of people are dying in the ocean trying to cross from Morocco and trying to enter Europe, unfortunately,
mm,
right? And
mm,
it's a really sad situation because Africa has the youngest population in the world, right? In Senegal
mm,
right now, the average actually age, I believe more than 55% is 19 years old. In Africa, actually, I believe by 2050, the average age is going to be about 14 years old. Right?
Oh, wow.
We have the youngest population in the world, but yet we have the least amount of opportunities basically to keep these young folks employed and for a better future or whatnot, right? So a lot of them are choosing to go through the desert and cross through the desert to Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, and try to cross the Mediterranean basically to go to Europe and like with these makeshift boats. And there's a lot of horror stories, people dying in there, people being enslaved in Libya. Have you seen that stuff? Right? Yeah. So people basically who are trying to cross from this sub-Saharan Africa to go to Europe, right? Usually what happens is they end up in the wrong hands in the desert, right? And the desert actually is a huge place for anybody to find you there, right? And people get enslaved. I've known people who are basically who were caught in Libya and they were basically enslaved and used to clean weapons. Imagine that, right? So you basically have like you basically have a debt because the people basically hold you and say, okay, well, unless your family can call and send us this money, we're not basically going to keep you free. But while you're here, we are basically fighting like this war in Libya or whatnot, right? But we're going to keep you here and you're going to basically clean our weapons every single day. We'll show you how to do it or whatnot, right? I mean, really things and like really horrible, like exploitative and modern day slavery things happening. Really, I mean, horrendous stories, right? And one of them actually, you and I believe, heard actually during the Oslo Freedom Festival, right? With Temu, right? Temu, like the story was I was so heartbroken because again, he was in Ethiopia or Eritrea. He was trying to basically go somewhere through Egypt to basically find a better life, a better opportunity, and they get caught up in that particular situation, right? But me that travels again, right? It saddens me because. And I don't want to like disparagingly about Europe. Yes, Europe maybe is developed because obviously they pillaged the African continent from slavery to colonialism, whatnot, right? But there's absolutely nothing in Europe itself, right? I've traveled extensively in Europe back in 2019, right? I went to Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Stockholm, France, and all these places. But what it is like the first thing you notice actually between Europe and Africa is that Europe is an aging population. It's a dying population, right? Like some places that I went to, like Poland and all these places, I was in shock because I'm like, wow, this is crazy. Actually, I never really paid attention to this thing. In Africa, there's kids everywhere you go. Everywhere you go, it's little babies, little kids, and they're running around everywhere, man. You go in Africa, man. Actually, that's wild, you know? In Europe, you basically barely ever see kids. So he said, okay, well, this is an aging population. They don't even have their own natural resources. Right? I mean, how are they going to fare in the future? We see basically the same thing happening in Japan because they don't have any kids anymore. Right? So what they want to do actually for them is that they want to put a blockade in the Mediterranean and basically stop the illegal flow of illegal immigration or whatnot, right? You know? And like really block these kids from like coming because to them actually it's like low skilled labor or whatnot, right? But what they want is control basically like more like a brain drain. So more actually give access or visas to the smartest folks in Africa, the youngest ones, right? The brightest one, youngest, most promising ones. We give them basically visas. We bring them to our countries. We give them like decent access to like a decent life, whatever. So hopefully they stay here and basically help us build the future instead of basically going back to their home countries. Right.
So a lot of the best and the brightest essentially go into France from all of these countries. I guess so you get the labor drain. And what do they do once they're in France? Like what opportunities do they have there that they wouldn't at home?
Yes, exactly. So what it is like usually they want blue collar work, so like tech work or whatnot, right? Because this country is kind of still, I mean, they're still, developing in the form of AI, big data, like fintech payments or whatnot, right? So and also like these kids are actually really finding ways to like really get this high paying jobs because nowadays when you work in tech, when you start, especially software engineering or this some kind of STEM kind of a degree, you actually get paid very well in these particular countries, right? So what it is like usually sometimes these people when they go, they don't want to go back home because life is comfortable, right? And I understand because Africa is, I won't say like it's a rough place, but it demands much more of the person to be able to basically make it and maintain there. Right. But the idea is like we owe it to ourselves to go back and share information and work and share our work ethics that we learn from these other places and our insights and how we basically see things from the outside and help the continent develop itself. Right. So that's unfortunately the side effect about that is because a lot of people basically, because of the brain drain, they go to Europe, they get married, they get comfortable, they get used to the conveniences of the modern world itself. Right. And it's very hard for them to go back home. And I see it everywhere.
Yeah. And this is, I mean, the dynamic you're describing is almost exactly what happens from Central America to the United States. A lot of these people, the best and the brightest, find legal ways to get in, but there's also like a large group of illegal immigrants that come in and they end up, what's interesting about what you said is a lot of the immigrants end up doing blue collar work, like, building roads or houses or something like that. And the thing that I find really sad is that they're doing it in France instead of their home.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
You could be building infrastructure, in Senegal and making Senegal better. Instead, they're making France better.
That is exactly. You are 100% on the like right, Jimmy. That's really what it is, right? And I heard it once before, and actually I don't know who I heard it from. And actually, why myself I'm going back to Senegal itself, right, to get established and like establish. And I've been working towards that like for the last decade or so, right? My brother is there, my mom is there. I have like a local infrastructure. I'm like really helping educate, do all the things locally, right? Because it's like it's like this, man. Like for me, and there's also like different levels to this thing. To me, it's like, why would I want to be a second-class citizen in any other country rather than being like a first-class citizen in my own country? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, and actually, and it's much more even prevalent for Black people specifically, actually. And I'll say that, right? And I don't want to make this again, bring this to like a racial discussion or whatnot, right? But the idea is like, we know, like I said, I didn't want to go to college in Europe because I know about the racism there. Racism in Europe is a very visceral type of racism, right? Because they never had actually civil rights movements there. Right, they never had it compared to the United States. Right, United States actually had a civil rights movement like that happened here with the Dr. King and everything else. That's actually why the United States is very, very different from any other place actually in the world itself. Right, and that's why I said actually Black people in America are the richest Black people in the world, and we need to basically take it upon ourselves to be leaders, role models, and help basically change the vision for Black people in the world itself. Right, it's very, very important. In Europe, they never had like a civil rights movement or whatever. Right, so in Europe, like, you can work hard, but you will never make it, actually. It's not like America. America, actually, I believe, actually, you can work hard here and really make it here. Right? Actually, like, the limit actually is, like, how hard you work and if you're offering a service that people need or whatnot, if you're solving a particular problem, right? In Europe, it's a little bit different, man. I feel like people are being really held back because of the actually color of their skin. So I'm like, okay, well, if that's the case, why would you want to stay in Europe? Why not basically go back to your home country instead of like being a second-class citizen? No matter how well you do, no matter how educated you are, no matter how many PhDs you can gather, whatever, right? They're always going to look at you as a second-rate citizen, right? So why not basically go back to your home country and basically help contribute to the country, help like really bring it forward and actually bring respect for Black folks all over the world, no matter if they are in Africa or anywhere else in the world. Right, and to me that's very, very important, and that's how I see it. Why would they want to stay and contribute to those particular economies that were like really enslaved us and really exploited us, and not go back to your home country where you can really make a difference actually and leave a legacy behind, which actually you can never leave in Europe, because why would you want to leave a legacy in Europe for actually in a place where that has basically over the years exploited you and is still exploiting you via this currency you don't control.
Well, that's interesting that you put it that way, because in a sense, what you said earlier is that you're kind of second-class citizens in your own country because of this monetary imperialism.
Exactly.
So in order to really make that choice a lot more, I guess, economically viable, it would be second-class citizen in France versus first-class citizen in Senegal.
Yes.
You would have to throw off the monetary chains.
Yes,
right?
yes, absolutely. But what it is like, to me, if you are like, let's say you are like more of a global person, because maybe you were born in Senegal, but you actually grew up somewhere else in the world or whatever, right? When you go back actually home, you have like a better perspective of the world itself, right? And you can also like really help like earn money from anywhere else in the world. And actually, I go back because I want to touch on Bitcoin. Actually, what I teach right now to the kids that I mentor and everything else, right? The reality is that we have this monetary system that actually, like I said again, somebody can actually opt out of, or maybe can use it parallel to what they are, maybe another system itself that they want to use or whatnot, right? So what's beautiful about actually Bitcoin is that as like a software engineer, you can work from anywhere in the world. You can work from Senegal and actually earn this money from the global stage itself, right? So it basically changes the game itself, right? Because now you don't have to actually rely on your local environment to earn money or to earn wealth itself, right? You can basically have this particular skill that's actually desirable, like globally on a global stage, on this particular monetary system that ties in the entire world. It's not like the Franc CFA or whatnot, right? This is a global monetary system that's not owned by anybody. And it's also an asset that actually you can have in your own country, regardless of actually what's happening. And actually that is unconfiscatable money, right? So to me, it's like what it is like we again say, okay, well, you maybe go back home. And maybe you don't know actually how you can like really become a first-class citizen, because again, another entity is kind of controlling your money or whatnot, right? But because of your knowledge of the world itself, right, you can actually help plug in to this new monetary system itself we can basically build maybe a foundation for a better future. And that's how I see it actually when you go home, right? Because now we actually have options.
Mm. Well, I mean, it seems to me that the way the monetary imperialism works is that they get the raw material from places like Senegal, but all of the sort of like secondary processing and things like that happen elsewhere.
That is,
and that's where a lot of wealth is gained, is in that additional stuff. So, I mean, it would seem to me that if you didn't have this monetary disadvantage, that you could, build, gold processing plants, uranium processing plants, and
but that wasn't the goal.
All this other stuff. And, maybe even like oil refineries or natural gas pipelines and stuff like that, do it yourself. And then now you capture a lot more of the value instead of letting, all of these other countries that are taking these raw materials and converting it.
But then again, it goes back to Europe again. Like, and I feel actually this was pretty much deliberate. It was done in a deliberate manner, right? Because what it is like they never wanted for Africa to basically industrialize. So Africa missed the entire industrial revolution. Right? We didn't have enough power, enough electricity. We didn't have basically industries to really build huge capacity industrial kind of systems or basically processes.
Well,
right?
You need really large power plants.
That's right.
For all
That's
of
right.
That
That's
stuff.
actually what you need those. Right?
There's none of that. I mean, I think power is still intermittent in most of Africa.
It is right.
Right?
But then again, we never really actually invested into like building hydroelectric power, like the huge river in Congo. From what I understand, that the river in Congo can pretty much power the entire continent of Africa, right? If it was actually really built into the particular dam actually needs to be built, right? But again, this infrastructure was never built itself. So the Europeans really what they did was pretty much again, they will basically the famous story of these cocoa farmers in the Ivory Coast and Ghana, right? People who basically grow cocoa and never tasted chocolate in their lives. Isn't that wild, right? So this person is basically making this raw material that is basically selling for pennies on the dollar in the international market. These basically people in Switzerland take this material and make this really expensive, of course, delicious kind of a chocolate or whatever, right? And they sell it all over the world. And they're selling it for so much that actually even the farmer who basically grew the particular raw material that cannot even afford to taste basically the finished product itself. Which is wild to me, right? But actually also things are changing in Africa. If you notice this year in 2022, I believe the president of Ghana went to basically Switzerland, and for the first time in the history, Ghana is no longer basically supply cocoa to Switzerland. First time ever. They basically asked them and say, hey, if you want to partner with us, come to Ghana and build cocoa factories or cocoa manufacturing, chocolate manufacturing, factories or whatever, right? And work with us with our raw material instead of us taking our cocoa and selling it to you for you to make this very expensive chocolate, right? So right now, I believe because Ghana are the world's biggest producers of combined of cocoa actually in the world. As a matter of fact, right? So they control these particular raw materials, right? So I think slowly but surely it's happening, right? So because now when you have also not only France itself, but also when you have people coming in and trying to mingle in a pot like China, Russia, and India, and the US itself, all these actually big powers, even actually Brazil itself, right? This part of the BRICS. So these people are coming there, and so it's becoming more of a how do you say? I believe it's going to become more competitive, and I believe actually in the long term it's better for Africa actually anyway. So that's how I see it. Yeah. So hopefully they bring in again more manufacturing locally. But I believe as these nations basically kind of hold their ground as far as shipping the raw materials, hopefully there's more manufacturing that happens in Africa for the long term.
Yeah, I love where that's going. The thing that seems to me the most difficult, and this is something that I've talked to some other people about, is that in order to have a manufacturing base, you need consistent power.
Yes.
You can't have intermittent power. You need...
Yep.
And the thing in Africa that seems very underdeveloped is fossil fuels, right?
Yes.
Just natural gas, coal, oil. Those things power not just electricity, which is, of course, very important, but, transportation, heating things up. If you want to do any sort of steel manufacturing, you need insane amounts of coal in order to get things hot enough so you can do it. That part seems to have been particularly restricted by Europeans, largely on this sort of hey, you need to be green. And, despite the fact that we ran on coal for over a century, you're not allowed to do
Yes.
it, or they sort of like
But look at Germany.
guilt you into not being able to do it, even though it's very reliable.
Yeah, but look at Germany. Germany's going back to coal after all these years, after all these talks about green stuff now because of the war, because basically Russia is cutting off the gas supplies or whatnot. They're going back to coal, right? But then again, for us, like let's take the example of Senegal. They found this again huge reserves of like petroleum and natural gas and all these things actually over the coast of Senegal itself, right? So again, like I'm hoping that in the future we build more processing, like I said, locally, because again, for the industries to develop, like even for Senegal, we need a huge amount of electricity, and a lot of it is still to this day generated by basically fossil fuels. Right. Unfortunately. Right. So for me, I'm hoping that over time, like as basically these things get discovered and actually because now like Europe is coming to invest in Africa, obviously, because they need the energy resources now because of the war.
But they always want the raw materials instead. Like you could build a natural gas power plant, right? Like if you have this reserve, don't build a pipeline, build a power plant.
That's right.
Like, and then you could do it, but of course, like because they control the money, they're probably going to restrict the funding of something like that by saying, well, it's not green enough, or you're not allowed to do it, or we're not going to lend you the money. It just seems like a completely rigged game where they prevent you from developing that like you want to.
Exactly. And actually, if you look at it now, like, like that's what's happening in the French-speaking countries in Africa. But if you look at Nigeria, to me, Nigeria is a role model. There's a guy by the name of Dangote. Dangote, this guy who's like started like really small, making like with basically tomato farms, right? He basically made tomato farms and made tomato paste. And because a lot of people in Africa consume a lot of tomatoes and stuff like that, he made a lot of money with that. And then over time, he grew into like this big energy tycoon, which is actually really, to me, like really amazing, right? And now he's like really building the first like major refinery in Africa, in Nigeria. And it's like worth billions of dollars, right? Because they want to basically refine it, like make like refined petroleum and petroleum products in Nigeria itself, right? And I think like that's how it should be again, right? Because then you look at like Nigeria, you look at like Senegal, and there's two different countries. One speaks English, one speaks French, one has their own money, another doesn't. People can claim that, yeah, maybe the French money is better because actually it's less inflation because the Naira is like really actually unfortunately plagued by like a huge inflation numbers or whatnot, right? But the idea is like their money benefits them, right? They are building things to basically for the future because it's never about today. I mean, yes, of course, today it's about like what we can do to survive today, but we gotta look at like the long term and to look at the future, especially for the young population coming in Africa, and putting these things into them, like instilling these dreams and aspirations and knowledge about being able to like really have advanced studies in STEMs or whatnot, right? To be able to like really build those kind of infrastructure that Africa needs in the future. So I think like we have to like inspire the kids to think more that way for the future, man, because it's going to be very, very important to build these local infrastructure, like when it comes to like gas, energy, renewables, whatever basically it might be for energy. Because energy is the future, man. Energy is everything.
Yeah, and you can't manufacture without energy,
That's right.
which is the really interesting thing. The intermittent power is almost always like associated with countries that don't have enough of it. Like manufacturing and energy and everything else. All right. Well, so we've talked a lot about all of this. What are you doing in Bitcoin, and what are you hoping to change in Senegal and all these other countries that you're working with? What's your hope? What's your goal, and what are you trying to do?
Sure. Yes. So right now, my goal is to bring about more education in Bitcoin, like at a macro level and also at a technical level itself, right? I have an academy called the Bitcoin Developers Academy. I really want to apologize to everybody. It's still not live yet because we're going to be live in this summer because we don't have a front end, unfortunately. And I can actually explain actually what the delay was in a couple of minutes. But my goal actually, for me, like reading the white paper in 2011 in Las Vegas, Nevada, like I will never forget this, right? Reading the white paper and seeing like a gleam of hope for the African continent. Because when I actually read the Bitcoin white paper, I never even thought about America. I really thought about Africa itself, right? Because that's where I'm from, because I knew that a huge number of the population is unbanked. I believe actually in Senegal it's less than 1/3. And it's actually a much smaller number, but let's say actually the 1/3 of the adult population is banked, right? So to me, it's like, well, what does it actually even mean? Which means that actually most people are dealing with cash. Most people don't have a vehicle for saving money, investing money, and all these things because they are not part of the typical financial system that you and I, let's say you and I here in America basically enjoy, right? I can easily go to a bank, open an account, open up a checking account, savings account, maybe investment account somewhere at Fidelity or one of these companies, and like really make it easy for me to basically build for the future. But in Africa, again, we don't have that, right? So not only actually we don't have a way for people to get banked, but then again, even if you are banked in this particular like really shady and dubious currency that's actually less than a currency because it's not even accepted anywhere in the world. Right. So actually, what are you even saving on actually and all these things, right? So for me, like, as I think about all these things that happened, like how my money was devaluated going to college and how like really all these pieces basically fit together. Like Steve Jobs beautifully said, right? Only looking back can we connect the dots, right? And so I look back in my history because again, I'm like an African American. I grew up half of my life in Africa, half of my life in America, right? So I can get a chance to basically see a lot of things from the outside looking in perspective. So looking at that, I said, okay, well, our money is obviously broken. And it's not even actually money. It's not even our money. It's made by someone else, right? So I see this technology that's actually really amazing again, right? Distributed technology that's actually truly neutral. It's not owned by anybody. And it's actually money, these global distributed money, which can carry monetary value. I thought about Senegal. I said, okay, well, how do we basically plug in our citizens to this particular system? How do we also plug in nations in Africa, especially French-speaking Africa, right? So they can do business with each other, with this, like, I feel like a much more transparent and useful system itself, right? So I said, okay, well, let me basically educate myself with this stuff and see how I can build actually a product myself and also like help educate others about this technology itself. And that's exactly what I'm doing right now. So what I'm basically working on is education first, which is a Bitcoin Developers Academy, right? And usually inspired by your own academy, to be honest, Jimmy, really, right? Because I really just like respected you, man. You're welcome, man. Again, I couldn't afford to come to the workshops, but the book was free. It was on GitHub. I was like, oh, this is amazing. Actually, this is like really programming Bitcoin from scratch on free on GitHub. I said, let me check it out. So of course, when I get in there, I look at it, I'm like, oh man, this is kind of complicated because you kind of like need some level of knowledge, like a little bit, right? So I would say like not like computer science, maybe like computer science level, but you need some kind of knowledge to be able to understand a little bit of Python and also like a little bit of this math that basically underlines this beautiful Bitcoin technology, right? So from that, I said, okay, well, since maybe some core developers need this information, but what about everybody else who just wants to build an application on top of Bitcoin? Right. So from there, I said, okay, well, maybe from on top of Bitcoin, maybe you don't necessarily need to know about elliptic curve cryptography right away. Right. So maybe actually for you, the person you want to be able to leverage a library or like SDK. In this particular situation, I'm basically leveraging BDK, the Bitcoin Developers Kit, or the LDK as well, the Lightning Developers Kit, which actually are both written in Rust because the Bitcoin Developers Academy is in Rust itself. And basically, why not use this to help folks like really onboard them really fast? And maybe like if you already have some kind of like a background knowledge in maybe some DevOps, a little bit of maybe web apps or like mobile apps, you could actually pick this up really fast and help like build the solutions for your particular community. And actually, so that's really actually how I basically went about it. So initially, when I actually did that, like designed the course itself was simply actually a CLI, application where you can basically like fire up BDK and like make a wallet from scratch, not from scratch because you are still using a BDK, which does like a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And you make a wallet and such, right? And you can talk to it via the CLI application. But then in the end, I said, okay, well, this is not enough. Right, because if the person wants to go go maybe find a job or build like solutions for the particular communities or whatnot, right? They need something that's more like a kind of a little more deeper stack, let's say, which has like the CLI itself, but it also has a front end, which is it could be web or could be mobile. Right. So initially I was working on a mobile front end to basically for the students, but then I realized I'm like, okay, well, this is actually more complicated because they will need a web wallet and all these things because you have to be able to like manage the private keys or whatnot. Right. So it actually opens up like a whole nother can of worms. So finally, actually, I basically settled on building a mobile wallet, basically using BDK or whatnot. So we show you how the CLI works, which means actually you understand how to query the Bitcoin daemon, talk to it, send some comments to it, like sign transactions. Basically construct a transaction, but not like your course where you actually go from the byte level. We actually do this more like a little bit higher level, right? So you use the library, you construct a transaction, you sign it, you basically do what we need to do. Maybe actually it's multisig, maybe it's not. But we basically show you the differences actually and how basically the mechanics of Bitcoin work underneath the hood. And basically once you understand that, we give you like a front end, a mobile front end for you to basically build a mobile wallet. And then from there, you understand basically what happens actually on your wallet when you do send, receive. Then you can understand the full stack from the mobile wallet basically to the CLI API level. So that's what we're doing like right now. Right?
Well, that's sounds awesome. Can't wait for your site to launch. And, I always try to, encourage all of the educators in this space because God knows we need a lot of educators.
Yes.
So can't wait for that stuff to come out. Where can people find this and where can people find you?
Yes. So the people can find me on Twitter. My last name and first name. Twitter is at DIOPFODE. You can also like pre-enroll on the Bitcoin Developers Academy, and we'll let you know like when it basically launches this summer. And otherwise, like on my Twitter DMs are always open. You can always like reach me through there or through the academy, or maybe the usual conferences or whatnot. And if I can add something really quick, actually, also Jimmy, before I leave here. So he asked actually how I'm basically involved in Bitcoin right now. So I'm heading back to Africa. I'm heading back to this actually Central African Republic because to tie into actually everything we talked about today, what I realized today, I was wondering, I'm like, why did the CAR actually adopt this Bitcoin law itself, right? So what I actually realized through some legacy information, doing some digging around, I realized that when a French African nation sells basically raw material or goods in the international market, and they don't get paid in, like, let's say, US dollars denominated funds, let's say if they get paid in basically BTC, that nation in turn doesn't have any obligations towards France to deposit that particular, let's say, BTC to the French coffers. Because basically the French only handle like fiduciary money, like, like the dollars or whatever else, yens or maybe whatever, other monies, right? So I thought about this. I said, okay, well, since this is very important, since also like a lot of African nations basically like rely on agriculture like for the future, and they want to basically boost exports. So for these nations, like for them, again, to get around from like to basically maybe get away from the CFA, why don't they basically accept like more like BTC for their basically exports, right? I want to export maybe peanuts or bananas or mangoes from Senegal because Senegal has some of the best mangoes. But how can I basically do it where even if I'm doing it internationally or when I do it like with my neighbors, like cross-border like commerce, how can we basically do it to use BTC in a way to basically make those actually transactions a lot more fluid? Right? Because I feel like in Africa, a lot of startups are basically focusing on the end user itself, which is actually great. But I believe actually there's already like a lot of like self-custody wallets actually they work very well, like Moon Wallet or like Wallet. I mean, like Wallet Satoshi is more it's like custodial, but a lot of these actually like wallets work very well. So why basically focus on recreating the same experiences again, right? When we have actually things that are open source that already work well. So for me, I want to basically look at again how do we basically use Bitcoin as a way to be advantage to like African governments, African nations, and basically people doing international commerce to be able to like exchange goods and use a currency other than the currency of the colonial powers. And that's how I see it. And that's what I would really want to help with right now. Specifically, I want to help basically these nations use BTC on a global international commerce kind of platform itself.
Well, that sounds amazing. And I really hope you can make some progress on that as we come into sort of like a newer world with, not a unipolar world, but a multipolar. All right. Well, thank you for, this conversation. I hope my listeners kind of learned a little bit about like the injustices that are going on in Africa and, and why it's so undeveloped. Honestly, a lot of it's monetary. Man, so thank you.
And overexploitation. You're welcome, man. It's just like I said again, it's overexploitation, man. Don't be like, these people, the African people, they this, they that, blah, 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 or it's not developed because that, because you don't know, because unless you actually been to Africa, you really don't know. But only thing people should think about is that basically Africa is overexploited. And it's up to us, the people in the diaspora and the young folks, to basically make a stance and really help change how people view Africa globally.
All right. Unchained Capital is a sponsor of this podcast. I'm an advisor to the company. I know the team well, and I'm excited for what they are building. If you need multi-sig, collaborative custody, or a Bitcoin native financial services partner, learn more at unchained.com. Well, that wraps it up for this episode of Bitcoin Fixes This. Fode can be found at DIOPFODE on Twitter and bitcoindevelopers.academy online. Until next time, fiat delenda est.